I'm going to invite Sarah Four Eyes. We'll have a good laugh at her expense, just like in high school. 12 years after graduation, choking with laughter, Chloe invited the former classmate whose boyfriend she had stolen to her lavish wedding. But the moment the woman stepped into the banquet hall, everyone froze with their jaws on the floor. Chloe adjusted a perfectly curled blonde strand for the 10th time and leaned back against the plush leather seat of the bridal limousine. Her custom Vera Wang gown, which cost as much as a luxury sedan, pressed pleasantly against her ribs with its corset, creating the illusion of royal posture. In her hand, she lazily swirled a crystal flute of Dom Perignon, watching the manicured lawns of an elite Connecticut-gated community glide by through the tinted glass. Next to her sat Connor, her newly minted husband, his face buried in his iPhone, closing a real estate deal, even on their wedding day. But that didn't bother Chloe. She had gotten exactly what she wanted: status, a breathtakingly expensive celebration, and a flawless match. She had curated the guest list personally and ruthlessly, like a casting director for a reality TV show. There were no dreary aunts from the Midwest in faded floral dresses, no gloomy losers. Only successful, beautiful people in designer suits and couture gowns, the kind of crowd guaranteed to draw envious sighs on Instagram. Chloe reached for her clutch to check her lipstick, and her eyes fell on a copy of the guest list she hadn't thrown away. Among the names embossed in gold foil on heavy cardstock was one that stood out: Sarah Collins. The corners of Chloe's lips curled up into a predatory smirk. She remembered how, in a fit of boredom and a desire to stir up some drama, she had been scrolling through old contacts on Facebook. She stumbled upon a profile with no profile picture, a generic handle, and sparse information about working at some county clinic. Sarah Four Eyes, the ultimate gray mouse. The girl who always sat in the front row clutching an AP biology textbook, drowning in hideous, oversized hoodies while Chloe dazzled the hallways in designer miniskirts. Connor looked up from his screen and glanced at his wife in mild confusion. "What are you grinning about? You were supposed to be crying during the vows, and now you're lighting up like a jackpot winner." He scoffed, sliding his phone into the pocket of his Tom Ford tuxedo. "Oh, it's nothing, babe. I just remembered something hilarious. I decided to slip an old friend into the guest list," Chloe sang out, waving the envelope. "Can you believe it? I invited Sarah Four Eyes. We went to high school together. We'll get a good laugh out of her, just like the good old days. She'll show up in some polyester rag from a thrift store, stand in the corner, and blink at us like a deer in headlights." Connor shrugged indifferently. He couldn't care less about his wife's high school petty drama. As long as the reception went off without a hitch and his business partners were impressed by the open bar, he was happy. Chloe recalled how a few days ago she had called her wedding planner and, stifling a laugh, ordered a courier to deliver a gold-leafed invitation to Sarah's address. Inside, she had included a handwritten note, dripping with sickeningly sweet phrases about how much she missed her dear old friend. Chloe was anticipating a triumph. She couldn't wait to see this loser walk into the ballroom dripping in fresh orchids and crystal chandeliers and choke on her own insignificance compared to Chloe's majesty. In her mind, she could still hear the squeak of chalk on the blackboard and Sarah's nasal voice answering the teacher's questions. In their junior year, Sarah was the only one who could consistently beat Chloe's GPA in the STEM classes. Actually, she didn't just beat her. She did it effortlessly, while Chloe had to scheme suck up to teachers or rely on her wealthy real estate developer father, who conveniently made massive donations to the school's athletic fund. But the real vendetta started over Derek. He was the captain of the varsity football team, the ultimate high school trophy. Chloe eventually got him deploying her entire arsenal, revealing outfits, vicious rumors, and straight-up manipulation. Meanwhile, Sarah just sat in the library, writing Derek's chemistry papers for him. Derek had actually hung out with Sarah for a couple of months, taking her to the movies. He seemed to genuinely find her interesting. Chloe saw the way he looked at that little mouse with warmth and respect, not his usual locker room lust. That infuriated Chloe more than anything. How could some gray moth command the respect of the guy Chloe was bending over backwards to get? So she took drastic measures. Sarah was prepping for pre-med, dreaming of cardiothoracic surgery, spending her nights buried in textbooks. Chloe staged a trap at a chaotic senior house party. She paid off a college frat boy to slip a roofie into Sarah's spiked punch. When Sarah became heavily intoxicated and disoriented, Chloe orchestrated it so Derek would walk into a guest bedroom and find Sarah passed out in the frat boy's arms. Sarah never understood what happened. She just lay on the bed with glassy eyes while the guy bought by Chloe stroked her hair. Derek yelled at Sarah, called her a piece of trash, and slammed the door. And Chloe was right there in the hallway, armed with a tissue and comforting words. A week later, she was his official girlfriend. But even that wasn't enough for Chloe. She didn't want this upstart to get into a good college, become a doctor, crawl out of her middle-class life, and end up anywhere near Chloe's social circle. Using her father's deep pockets and connections, she pulled a stunt akin to a varsity blues scandal. Sarah's application documents for early admission to Johns Hopkins magically got lost in the system. She didn't fail. She was simply disqualified due to a clerical error. Any brewing scandal was quickly hushed up. Chloe's father greased the right palms and poor Sarah was left out in the cold, eventually forced to attend a severely underfunded state college. 12 years had passed. Chloe had married, divorced, blown through a chunk of her father's trust fund, and was now successfully marrying into money again. Sarah, according to her assumptions, was rotting away in some municipal hospital giving flu shots to seniors. The limo gently pulled up to the entrance of the exclusive country club. Valets in crisp uniforms opened the doors. Pompous classical music drifted through the air. Chloe plastered her most dazzling smile on her face, and arm in arm with Connor stepped into the glittering ballroom. The guests had already gathered. Champagne flowed like water. The towering raw bar of oysters and caviar looked aggressively expensive. Chloe fluttered from table to table, accepting congratulations. She soaked in the admiring glances of her bridesmaids, watching them nervously adjust their designer dresses, desperately trying not to look worse than the bride. However, Chloe kept glancing toward the grand mahogany doors, waiting for the latecomers. And then, just as the MC announced that it was time for toasts and surprises, the heavy doors at the far end of the hall slowly opened. At first, no one noticed. The band was playing an upbeat jazz number and waiters were weaving between tables. Only Chloe noticed. She set down her crystal flute and stared down the aisle. A tall, statuesque woman with noble posture, the kind you can't buy from a Beverly Hills etiquette coach, stepped into the hall. She was wearing a form-fitting deep emerald gown. It didn't scream flashy logos, but the tailoring made it instantly clear this piece cost more than Chloe's entire floral budget. And it wasn't bought at a boutique on Fifth Avenue, but rather custom-made in Milan or Paris. An elegant cashmere wrap was carelessly draped over her shoulders and flawless diamonds sparkled at her ears, catching the light against her sculpted cheekbones. The woman took off her designer sunglasses and Chloe flinched. She didn't recognize the face immediately, but she remembered the eyes. Calm, piercing, intelligent, and slightly mocking. Instead of the awkward, nerdy girl with thick-rimmed glasses, an incredibly glamorous, powerful woman stood in the hall. Next to her, Chloe, in her puffy, meringue-like white dress, suddenly felt like an over-decorated prom queen. The noise in the room began to die down. First the bridal party table went quiet, then the men at the bar stopped talking, openly staring. Guests froze with their mouths agape, their eyes following the stranger. She moved with a slow, fluid grace, as if she were the host of the evening, and Chloe was merely a +1. Behind the Emerald Diva walked a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal bespoke suit. He stayed a half step behind her, radiating a quiet, authoritative presence and obvious pride. With one hand, he gently guided his partner by the elbow. In the other, he carried a small velvet jeweler's box. Chloe swallowed hard, trying to keep her face from crumbling. Her stomach dropped to her knees. This couldn't be happening. Sarah couldn't have changed this much. It had to be a mistake, a prank by her bridesmaids. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the edge of the lace tablecloth. "Chloe, why are you freezing up? Who is that?" "Your glamorous cousin from Switzerland, her maid of honor," Ashley hissed in her ear, pulling up her slipping neckline. The woman, meanwhile, walked right up to the sweetheart table. Up close. Chloe could see fine laugh lines around her eyes and the strict, confident set of her lips, which only added to her aristocratic charm. She smiled. "Hello, Chloe." "Accept my congratulations," Sarah said, her voice devoid of any hesitation. It was a deep, resonant voice, the kind used to giving orders, not asking for permission. "You wanted to have some fun, right? A little high school reunion." Chloe opened her mouth to deliver a rehearsed, catty remark about Four Eyes. But the words died in her throat, turning into an unintelligible croak. She felt the blood rush to her face, burning her ears and neck. She had prepared to sneer at a pathetic loser, and instead, she had just taken a psychological bullet to the chest. The man standing behind Sarah took a step forward and placed the velvet box on the table in front of Connor. He slowly flipped it open. Inside sat a pair of exquisite sapphire cufflinks and a folded, slightly yellowed piece of paper. "My wife wanted to pass along not only this modest wedding gift," the man said, his piercing gaze locking onto Chloe's pale face with barely concealed disgust, "but also this document, a copy of the toxicology report and a sworn affidavit from the frat brother you paid off 12 years ago. Remember that little stunt with the spiked drink, Chloe?" A dead silence fell over the ballroom. You could hear a dropped fork clatter against the hardwood floor. Connor stared at his wife in utter bewilderment. Chloe's face had gone from crimson to a sickly, chalky white. The guests exchanged nervous glances, not fully grasping the details, but acutely sensing the catastrophic scandal unfolding. "It lists the exact narcotic I was drugged with," Sarah continued calmly, her voice carrying across the silent room better than any microphone. "And attached is the confession of the guy you bribed. Your father swept it under the rug back then. But the thing is, Chloe's statutes of limitations can be tricky when it comes to conspiracy fraud and forging federal student loan and university admissions documents. Don't worry, I didn't come to ruin your party with police sirens. I just came to look you in the eye and tell you that you achieved absolutely nothing. I became a cardiothoracic surgeon. A successful one. I now head the surgical department at one of the largest clinics in Europe, and I own my own medical center. And I am happily married to a man who knows the value of integrity." She shifted her gaze to Connor, who was looking at his bride with a mixture of horror and confusion. "Be careful with her, Connor. She's used to getting what she wants at any cost," Sarah added. Without waiting for a goodbye, she turned on her heel and headed for the exit. Her stilettos clicked against the parquet floor. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea guests, still staring in complete shock. The man in the bespoke suit snapped the velvet box shut, gave Connor a cold nod, and followed his wife, leaving the smoking ruins of a $500,000 wedding in their wake. Chloe remained standing, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto the dock. A ring of curious, bewildered, and gossip-hungry guests closed in around her. The clicking of Sarah's heels faded, and the heavy oak doors shut with a final echoing thud. Seconds later, the purr of a luxury engine sounded outside, and a sleek black Maybach glided past the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence in the hall was so absolute that the wind rustling the pine trees outside was audible. Nobody dared to move. Eyes darted from the closed doors back to the bride's face. Chloe felt the floor dropping out from beneath her, her vision blurred. She stared at the velvet box sitting next to the floral centerpiece, and at the piece of paper, which now looked less like a document and more like a live grenade. Her temples throbbed and her throat was so dry she couldn't force out a sound. Connor slowly turned to his wife. His face, usually smug and relaxed, now radiated a lethal mix of disbelief and disgust. He picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were radioactive, and scanned the lines. With every second, his eyebrows climbed higher and his jaw clenched tighter. "Chloe, what is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a glacial chill. Hearing him use that tone cut her worse than a knife. "What kind of psycho circus is this? You drugged some girl in high school? You forged documents to ruin her college admission? Are you out of your mind?" Chloe frantically licked her dry lips. She tried to smile, but it twisted into a pathetic grimace of panic. "Connor, baby, it's a mistake. She's lying. It's jealousy, don't you see? She was always obsessed with me. She just wanted to ruin our wedding, so she hired actors for this stunt. You can't believe this crazy bee," she babbled, desperately grabbing the sleeve of his Tom Ford jacket. Connor yanked his arm away and took a step back. His gaze grew sharp and calculating. He looked at Chloe as if seeing a stranger. "Jealousy, you say?" he repeated with a humorless scoff. "Chloe, that woman just left in a car worth more than this entire country club rental. She's wearing jewelry that costs more than your father's annual net profit. And her husband, if I'm not mistaken, is Victor Sterling. The CEO of the European healthcare conglomerate my partners have been trying to land a contract with for 3 years. What exactly is she jealous of? Your dress, which you spent 3 months crying over and you still look like a plastic cake topper?" A muffled gasp rippled through the room. Guests began whispering, fiercely exchanging meaningful looks. Chloe's bridesmaids, who an hour ago had been flatteringly praising every detail of her look, now watched her with poorly concealed schadenfreude. Ashley had already pulled out her iPhone and was texting furiously, undoubtedly blasting the gossip to everyone who hadn't made the guest list. The MC, an experienced professional with a plastered-on smile, tried to save the sinking ship. He stepped to the center of the dance floor and clapped his hands, signaling the band to play. "All right, folks, just a little misunderstanding. Let's raise our glasses to the newlyweds. The best is yet to come," he boomed with forced enthusiasm. But the guests didn't move. Everyone was waiting for the finale. Connor raised a hand, gesturing sharply for the MC to shut up. The music, which had barely started, died instantly. "I want the truth," he said, staring dead into Chloe's eyes. "And skip the usual waterworks and whining. What did you do to that woman?" Chloe felt everything inside her twist into a tight, suffocating knot. She was backed into a corner. Hundreds of eyes were on her, waiting for an answer. Her perfect plan, her triumphant day, had mutated into a living nightmare. She opened her mouth to lie again, but she couldn't force a single word out. She caught her reflection in the mirrored wall of the hall, disheveled her expensive mascara, smudged under her eyes, her lips trembling. A pathetic sight. "It was a long time ago, Connor," she whispered, dropping her gaze. "I was a stupid teenager. I just wanted Derek to be with me. And she was in the way. I didn't think it would be that serious. It was just a joke. Just a stupid prank." Connor laughed. A dry, harsh bark of a laugh. "You slip narcotics into someone's drink, destroy their reputation, sabotage their college education, and you call it a prank. Do you realize you're a felon? Do you realize that if she decides to go to the DA, my firm will be dragged through the mud with you?" He snatched his champagne flute from the table and downed it in one gulp. "And your dad, I assume, paid the right people to make it vanish?" he continued, not waiting for an answer. "So this is the foundation of your wonderful family. Fraud, bribery, destroying innocent people. Just beautiful." At that moment, Chloe's father, a heavy-set man with a flushed face and an intimidating glare, marched up to the table. He had heard Connor's last words and was now drilling his son-in-law with a furious look. "Connor, stop being dramatic," he hissed through his teeth. "What happened in high school is ancient history. Kids do stupid things. Today is a celebration. People are watching. You're embarrassing my daughter. I'm embarrassing her," Connor exploded. "Your daughter just put all of us in a massive legal and PR liability that will take years to clean up. Do you know who that woman's husband is? That's Victor Sterling. He controls 15% of the private medical market in Europe. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for years, and now he knows me as the guy who married a sociopath." Chloe's father turned a deeper shade of magenta. He shifted his heavy gaze to his daughter. "Chloe, why in God's name did you invite her to your wedding? Just to gloat." The bride stood in silence, her head bowed. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She felt everything she had built over the years turning to ash. Her reputation, her marriage, her social standing, all of it vaporized in 10 minutes. The crowd began to stir. People were quietly getting up from their tables, slipping on their jackets, and picking up their designer purses. No one wanted to stay at this toxic reception. The wedding that was supposed to be the social event of the season had devolved into a freak show. "I'm getting an annulment," Connor said quietly, but clearly. "We've been married for 2 hours, and I already know it's the worst mistake of my life. I'll have my lawyers contact yours in the morning." Chloe's head snapped up. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining thousands of dollars worth of makeup. "Connor, please don't do this. I love you, I'll fix it, I'll talk to her, I'll beg for forgiveness," she screamed, lunging for him. Connor dodged her hands and looked at her with pure revulsion. "You don't love anyone but yourself, Chloe. And you never have. Even right now, you aren't thinking about the fact that you ruined a human being's life. You're only thinking about how to save your own skin and keep the black card of a rich husband. You won't fix it. People like you don't change." He turned on his heel and strode quickly toward the exit. Chloe's father tried to stop him, grabbing his shoulder, but Connor aggressively shoved his hand away and stormed out of the hall, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him. Chloe was left standing in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by the thinning crowd of guests who looked at her with pity or outright disgust. Her mother, sitting at the family table, had buried her face in her hands and was quietly weeping. Her father, red to the tips of his ears, was desperately trying to calm the remaining guests and beg them to stay, but no one was listening. People left without saying goodbye, taking their envelopes back and leaving untouched plates of filet mignon on the tables. Half an hour later, the hall was practically empty. Only Chloe's parents, a couple of her most dependent, sycophant friends, and the MC, who was awkwardly hovering near his DJ booth, remained. The floral arrangements already seemed to be wilting. The candles were burning low and the massive 6-tier cake stood untouched. Chloe sat on a Chiavari chair staring at a fixed point on the wall. Her hands rested limply in her lap. She couldn't process the reality of what had just happened. This morning, she was royalty. Tonight, she was a pariah. Her father walked over and heavily dropped into the chair next to her. "Well, I hope you're happy," he said, sounding suddenly very old and tired. "It's been over a decade, and you still couldn't let it go. Why did you have to dig up the past? Why invite her?" Chloe lifted her swollen, tear-streaked eyes to her father. "I just wanted to show her that I won, that I was better, that I had everything and she had nothing," she whispered, her voice broken. Her father gave a bitter, hollow chuckle. "And what's the result? Who looks like the fool now? You lost your husband, your reputation, and maybe your freedom, if that woman decides to take this to federal court." Meanwhile, she drove off in a Maybach with a billionaire husband and a clean conscience. Who won Chloe? She buried her face in her hands and wailed. Her shoulders heaved as hoarse, desperate sobs tore from her chest. She knew her father was right. She had lost on every conceivable front. At that moment, her iPhone sitting on the table buzzed. Chloe mechanically glanced at the screen. It was an Instagram DM. The sender, Sarah Collins. With trembling fingers, Chloe opened the message. There were only a few lines. "I'm not going to the police. Not because I forgive you, but because you're already punished. You're going to live with this humiliation and wake up every day knowing your entire life was a fragile, fake victory. I'm moving on." Goodbye, Chloe. Chloe read the message 3 times. She didn't know what she felt: relief that she wouldn't be facing a grand jury, or a burning, suffocating shame that she had just been thrown a scrap of pity like a beggar. Her tears dried up. Inside, there was only a vast, echoing emptiness. She stood up, smoothed down the crumpled tulle of her Vera Wang dress, and slowly walked toward the exit. Her parents yelled something after her, but she didn't hear them. She just needed to get away, to hide, to disappear. As she walked through the lobby, she mindlessly grabbed a forgotten gray cardigan off a coat rack. Stepping out onto the country club porch, she watched the taillights of the very last guest's car fade down the driveway. No one looked back. She was entirely alone. Chloe walked around the side of the building, sat on a cold stone bench near the golf course, and stared up at the dark sky. The stars flickered, cold and indifferent. She remembered Sarah from high school, a quiet, kind, fiercely intelligent girl who never hurt anyone, and Chloe had broken her life just because she could, just to feel a fleeting sense of superiority. Now the roles were reversed. Sarah had become exactly who she always dreamed of being, while Chloe was left with nothing. No husband, no future, and zero self-respect. She sat there until dawn. The country club security guards eyed her suspiciously, but didn't dare approach. When the first pink rays of the sun bled into the sky, Chloe stood up and slowly began to trudge down the empty suburban road toward town. She had no idea where she was going or what she was going to do. She only knew one thing: her old life was dead. She would have to start from scratch. No trust fund, no country club connections, no safety net. Exactly how Sarah had started. For the first time in her life, Chloe felt something akin to deep respect for the woman she had always despised. And she felt a burning, agonizing shame not in front of the society crowd, but in front of herself. Chloe wandered down the empty morning highway, shivering in the oversized cardigan. Her strapless dress was stained with dirt. Her expensive Jimmy Choo heels had become torture devices hours ago. She stopped, kicked them off into the ditch, and kept walking barefoot on the cold, rough asphalt. The sharp gravel dug into the soles of her feet, but the physical pain felt almost grounding. It distracted her from the black hole that had opened in her chest. She didn't know how much time had passed or how many miles she had walked. Occasionally cars sped by, but no one slowed down. The sight of a barefoot, smeared woman in a dirty wedding gown trudging down a Connecticut highway at dawn was more terrifying than pitiful. Finally, a bus stop appeared on the shoulder, a rusted, graffitied plexiglass shelter. Chloe limped over to it and collapsed heavily onto the cold metal bench. Sitting next to her was an older Hispanic woman with a large canvas tote bag, patiently waiting for the early morning commuter bus. She looked the bizarre bride up and down with unconcealed curiosity. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice thick with genuine concern. "You look like a runaway bride, but the wrong way around." Chloe let out a bitter, exhausted laugh, staring down at her bruised, dirty feet. "You pretty much nailed it," she replied, her voice raspy and raw. "Except I was the one kicked out, and I deserved it." The woman nodded sympathetically, asking no further questions. She rummaged through her massive tote bag and pulled out a pair of worn but clean slip-on sneakers. She handed them to Chloe. "Take these!" "It ain't right to walk the streets barefoot. And here, take my old windbreaker. Cover up. My daughter's about your size." Chloe wanted to refuse out of habit, but she had zero pride left. She took the sneakers in silence and pulled the worn nylon jacket over her bare shoulders. It smelled faintly of laundry detergent and stale coffee. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing simple, uncalculated kindness from a stranger, and it made her eyes sting. A battered public transit bus pulled up, brakes squealing. Chloe climbed aboard and took a seat by the window. She was heading toward the city, not knowing why. The motion just gave her the illusion of purpose. In the seat across from her, a young, exhausted mother was bouncing a fussy toddler who kept reaching his chubby hands toward Chloe's sparkly dress. Chloe caught herself staring at the child with an aching sorrow. She would never have this. Connor had been right. She didn't know how to love. The bus hit every pothole on the road, rocking Chloe back and forth. She closed her eyes, trying to shut off her brain, but the memories of the ballroom kept looping like a nightmare. An hour later, the bus reached the downtown transit center. Chloe got off near an old rundown public park where she used to hang out as a teenager before her dad got rich. It hadn't changed. Same peeling green benches, same concrete fountain that hadn't had water in it for a decade. She sat on a bench and pulled out her phone. The screen displayed 37 missed calls from her mother and 24 text messages from the friends who had fled the reception first. She swiped them away. She didn't care. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she had saved years ago for emergencies. It belonged to a private investigator her father used for corporate espionage and delicate matters. Chloe stared at the digits for a long time, then pressed call. "Yeah, who is this?" a gruff male voice answered. "This is Chloe Hastings. I need you to find everything you can on a woman named Sarah Collins. Where she lives, where she works, the name of her hospital. Everything. I'll wire your retainer within the hour," she said, her voice completely dead. The PI grunted. "Consider it done." Chloe hung up and leaned her head back against the wooden slats of the bench. She didn't fully know why she needed this information. Maybe a twisted part of her wanted to track Sarah down to humiliate herself and beg for forgiveness. Or maybe in the darkest corner of her mind, she was hoping to find some dirt to ease her own guilt. 3 days later, the PI emailed her a comprehensive encrypted file. Chloe read it, sitting on a mattress on the floor, of a cheap month-to-month apartment she had rented on the bad side of town, hiding from her parents' furious demands to come home. The dossier revealed that Sarah wasn't just a brilliant surgeon. She was the founder of the Kind Hearts Foundation, a Chicago-based charity that funded pediatric heart surgeries for uninsured and undocumented children. Her husband, Victor, wasn't just a ruthless corporate shark. He was a major philanthropist who funded orphanages and hospices across the globe. Chloe swiped through the pages on her iPad, and with every sentence, she felt more physically sick. Sarah hadn't just become rich and successful. She had become a profoundly good human being. Everything Chloe was not. At the very bottom of the report, the PI had added a personal note, FYI. Target visited your hometown 3 years ago. According to local records, she was asking around for you. You were in Saint-Tropez on your first honeymoon. Intent unknown. Chloe stared at the screen. Sarah had come looking for her, to get revenge, to talk. She didn't know. She tossed the iPad aside and walked to the grimy window. Below, the gritty city street was alive. Commuters rushing to the subway, moms walking kids to public school, a guy selling cheap umbrellas on the corner, and Chloe was locked in a box trying to figure out if she even had a soul left to save. 2 weeks passed. Chloe drove to a pawn shop and sold every piece of designer jewelry she owned, including the massive diamond engagement ring Connor had never bothered to ask for back. With the cash, she bought a one-way Amtrak ticket to Chicago, where the headquarters of Sarah's foundation was located. She had no plan. She didn't know what she would say or if security would just throw her out onto the pavement, but she had to try. The train pulled into Union Station early in the morning. Chloe stepped onto the platform, carrying a single canvas duffel bag containing a few cheap basics from Target. She took a deep breath of the freezing, windy air and caught an Uber. The foundation was housed in a modern sunlit brick and glass building in the West Loop. A bright sign read Kind Hearts Foundation. Chloe stood on the sidewalk for 20 minutes, paralyzed by fear. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, her palms sweating despite the Chicago wind. Finally, she pushed through the glass doors. At the sleek reception desk sat a friendly young woman typing away on an iMac. "Hi there. I'm looking for Dr. Sarah Collins," Chloe said, her voice shaking. The receptionist looked up with a warm smile. "Doctor, Collins is currently in surgery at Northwestern. She won't be back at the office until late afternoon. Would you like to leave a message or schedule an appointment?" Chloe nodded. She gave her first name only and put herself down for 6 p.m. She had the entire day to mentally prepare. She wandered around the windy city, sat in Millennium Park with a cheap coffee, and watched the tourists. Time dragged torturously. She rehearsed 100 different apologies in her head, but they all sounded hollow and pathetic. At 10 minutes to 6, she was back in the foundation's lobby. Her heart felt like it was going to explode. She tugged at the plain. Cheap gray sweater she had bought the day before, a far cry from her usual Balenciaga, and walked up to the desk. The receptionist led her to a modest but bright office on the second floor. Chloe sat in the visitor's chair and waited. The walls were covered in framed photographs of smiling, recovering children. Diverse faces, kids from all over the country whose lives had been saved. The door clicked open. Sarah walked in. She was wearing blue surgical scrubs, a white coat draped over her arm, She looked exhausted after a 10-hour surgery, but her posture was impeccably straight, her eyes sharp. Seeing Chloe, she stopped in the doorway. Her face registered no shock, no anger, just a quiet, weary curiosity. "Hello, Chloe. I had a feeling you might show up eventually," she said, walking around to sit behind her desk. Chloe stood up. Every single word she had rehearsed for the last 12 hours instantly evaporated. She stood in absolute silence, looking at the woman whose life she had tried to demolish. I came to tell you that I'm sorry," she started, her voice cracking. Sarah raised a hand, cutting her off. "I don't need apologies, Chloe. Words don't rewrite history. Tell me why you actually flew halfway across the country." Chloe looked down at her cheap canvas sneakers. Then, for the first time in her adult life, she looked another human being dead in the eyes with total honesty. "I came because I want to learn how to be someone else. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm fundamentally broken, but I want to try. And I figured, if I'm going to learn how to be a decent human being, I should probably learn from the person I treated like garbage, who turned out to be 10 times the woman I am." Sarah stared at her for a long, silent moment. Her piercing eyes analyzed Chloe's face, searching for the old manipulation, the old arrogance. Finding none, she gave a microscopic nod. "We happen to need administrative volunteers for the family housing wing. It's unglamorous. You'll be doing data entry, answering angry phone calls from insurance companies, and organizing food drives. The hours are brutal. The pay is literally zero. Can you handle that?" Chloe felt a massive choking lump rise in her throat. She nodded frantically, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks, completely unable to speak. "Then be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Bring a notepad and leave the drama at the door," Sarah said, softly but firmly. "And remember this, Chloe, you can never fix the past. But if you have enough guts, you can build a decent future right on top of the ruins." Chloe practically stumbled out of the office, the tears flowing freely now. As she walked down the stairs and out into the biting Chicago night, she felt the crushing, suffocating weight of 12 years of malice and vanity slipping off her shoulders. The road ahead of her was going to be brutal, long, and unglamorous. But for the first time in her life, she was actually ready to walk it.